The partnership between the Butte RCD and the Konkow Valley Band of Maidu Indians started after the campfire when we were collectively working together with the Plumas National Forest to try to envision what the next forest landscape should look like on these lands that are currently federally owned here in the Concow Basin. The landscape that we've inherited here in California is a landscape of exclusion of tribes and exclusion of native land management. This landscape could be a lot healthier, it could be a lot more resilient, it could be a lot safer to live in. Most of this landscape is pretty homogeneous, closed-in conifer forest at this point, but if we're to believe accounts of early settlers who came to California, native land management was very effective for a long time. We need all of the voices and perspectives in our community. Every time that we sit down and talk with folks who have that tribal perspective, I always learn something and see a new window on the landscape that I hadn't considered, that I had not been raised to consider. Maybe something that sparked that for me is when, Concow is a funny word, right? Like, where does that come from? But at some point, somebody explained to me that it comes from Koyankawi. And I've heard that translated different ways, but one of the ways I've heard it is like the people of the meadow. I just couldn't stop thinking about that, like the people of the meadow. The meadow, like, I mean, you're just standing in dead, dense trees as far as you can see. So to think that this was once so open with so many oaks and I'm sure wildflowers and milkweed and everything, that it was thought of as the meadow. And to understand you could help others play a role in sustaining those plants on the landscape so that they could have a future too, that just kind of feels like why we're here. So as the Butte RCD developed grant applications to fund the work that we wanted to do in partnership with the Plumas National Forest, we wrote the tribe into the initial planning grant to fund them to develop an ecological monitoring plan. And so that allowed the tribal members to spend some time and get paid to write down for themselves what they wanted to monitor, not just artifacts, but also living cultural resources. So all of the plants that are out there that are really culturally important. If we were going to do this project, the point of it is for the land to be more biodiverse and more resilient to fire in the future, and what better way to do that than to have the tribe monitoring it for the same plants that they would have cultivated and tried to protect there for many generations. You know, the Concow Valley Band of Maidu Indians is not federally recognized, and they don't necessarily have an ongoing budget to sustain their collaboration with federal aid with anybody. They might not have the resources to pay a tribal historic preservation officer or a cultural monitor to just go out and monitor other agencies' projects. So we definitely wanted to make sure that we secured some funding for them to be able to do that and not have to do it for free. And then it was time to write the implementation grant, which is what funds getting the saws out there and actually doing the work of restoring what was a super burnt conifer forest back to more of an oak woodland as the black oaks and dogwoods and elderberries and hazel resprouted, and you could start to sort of see the more ancient forest come up through the skeletons of the conifers. So when it was time to write that implementation grant, we again wrote the tribe in to be able to actually perform that monitoring, and so that's how tribal members can get paid to go out on the federal lands. You know, these landscapes that we're talking about, they've been managed by the Forest Service for, I don't know, 50 or 100 or a little more years. And the Forest Service, I think they'd be the first to tell you, didn't have the resources to manage them even the way that they wanted to, and didn't have the depth of knowledge to understand how they might have been best managed. And the Forest Service surveyed these lands for cultural resources in compliance with their policies, and they worked really hard. And they didn't even find all of these artifacts and evidence of past occupation that the tribe was able to find almost immediately. And I'm not saying anything that, you know, I think the Forest Service wouldn't say if they were sitting here too. So it's no secret that agencies can't manage the land optimally by themselves. And every time that the tribes get involved, it seems like the management of the land just gets better and better. I personally believe that being a good citizen entails knowing the minimum about the natural world that we live in. And I think it probably also entails knowing the minimum about the indigenous history of this land that we occupy now. 5 or 6 years ago, I didn't even know whose tribal territory I was standing on. And then I didn't understand the complex nuances of, like, oh, there's actually all these different tribal territories and how everybody interacted with each other and had different relationships with these different species and these different dialects. Just that richness of indigenous history that I was never taught. So it's been an incredible privilege and super fun to get to learn some of that, and I'm just getting started. I think that that's useful for non-Native people to do. Over the long term, hopefully that leads to more Native land management and just a better relationship overall between Native and non-Native communities, but it's also just really enriching. I'll be walking along sometimes. It could be in Konkow, it could be someplace else. And suddenly I realize I'm walking through a patch of some plants that I know are culturally important and that people many generations ago, Native people, would have cultivated and returned to again and again. And maybe you don't see them so much anymore. Like dogbane or Indian hemp is one, or even just a really nice stand of hazel or elderberry or something, and it just catches your eye. It looks different. There's just a feeling to those plants. You know that they've been there for so long. It always makes me think, what if the whole landscape was in flower like this? Like the milkweed we were looking at over there, that was so special. So I want to see more milkweed.